How was your wife? How was your?
We're in the portion of Re'eh. Re'eh Anochi nosin lefnechem hayom. Re'eh. You should see, I am putting before you today the bracha, uklala. I'm presenting before you the blessing and the curse. So Rashi says, which blessings and curses are we speaking about? Hamuros paragriz ma'arevel. The blessings which we're going to speak about later, few psukim, half Klaus stood on Mount Grizim, the other Haravel, and the Kohanim Levim were between the two mountains with the Aron, and they turned towards one mountain. They said, blessed is this, blessed is that. And all the Jews answered, Amen. And they turned to the other mountain. They said, cursed is this one, and cursed if you violate. So I'm presenting before you bracha klala, blessing and curse. Es habrocha shetishmu el mitzvos Hashem Elokechem. The bracha, when you heed the commandment of Hashem your God, Asher Anochi Mitzav Eschem Hayom, which I am commanding you today, va'klolo, and the curse im lo sishmu. If you don't listen, el mitzvos Hashem Elokechem, v'sartem min haderech, and you veer from the path, Asher Anochi Mitzav Eschem Hayom, Loleches achrei elhim acherim, to go after alien gods, meaning idolatry, ashelu yidatem. Just make a few points. The word es has no translation. Es is an adjunct. Like the Gemara tells us, es Hashem Elokecha tiro, there's a mitzvah to revere Hashem. The Torah could have said Hashem Elokecha tiro. What's es Hashem Elokecha tiro? So the Gemara tells us l'rabas tamid chachomim, that just as Hashem wants you to revere Him, He wants you to revere Talmid Chacham, Torah sages. That's the es. It's an adjunct to Hashem Elokecha. If you notice in the second pasuk, Moshe says, "I am presenting before you the blessing and the curse." Then it says es habrocha. With the word brocha, the word es is associated. When he speaks about the next pasuk, haklolo, it doesn't say es haklolo. It just says haklolo. Why, when we speak about brocha, do we say es habrocha? And klolo, it doesn't add the word es. So over here, if you take a look at the Balaturim writes, es habrocha, the Chav Zayin, the Balaturim, if you have the Mikros Klu. The brocha somewhere es loshem ribui. Es comes to include kilo nofal dover echot mekol dvoro hatov. When it comes to blessing, everything which Hashem says it will happen. Ubeklolo lo omar es ela haklolo. It's only the klolo, the curse. When very often when you receive a blessing, the blessing is expansive. It's not limited to the blessing itself. There are many other things which you are a beneficiary of. When it comes to the curse, God forbid, it's limited to the curse itself. Okay, we'll explain that in a moment. So there's a beautiful Arachaim HaKodesh over here. It says, what is the bracha? Es asher tishmu, el mitzvos Hashem Elokechem. We speak about there are many levels we could serve God. You could serve Hashem out of fear of punishment. Now, why are you serving Hashem? You don't want to be punished. because you're concerned about the consequence. What about a person who serves Hashem out of reverence? What is reverence? You recognize who you're serving out of love. Because you love Hashem, therefore you serve him. What about a person is not going to be a beneficiary of any level of reward, but you recognize the one you're serving has that special value. In that situation, a person would serve that person, even if there's no reward, the privilege to have the opportunity to serve that individual or that entity, one doesn't need reward. That's if one serves out of love or out of reverence. But if one serves with an ulterior motive, I wouldn't do it only because I know if I won't, I'll be punished. Or I'll only do it because I know I'll be rewarded. So you're not serving for the sake of serving, you're serving for the sake of ulterior motive. So the Or Chaim HaKadosh says, what's the bracha? Asher tishmol mitzvos Hashem Elokechem. The bracha is just listening to the word of Hashem, you're already blessed. Doing the right thing. Serving Hashem and listening to heeding his word, being in good standing with him, that itself, without reward. What's klola? What's a curse? A person who turns his back on God. That person is a cursed person, not because he's going to be punished. When you detach yourself from the source of life, automatically you're a cursed person. And when you attach yourself to the source of life, then you're blessed, unrelated, because you can receive reward. So what's the bracha? Asher tishmul. What is the klol of the curse? Asher lo tishmul. When you don't listen to mitzvahs Hashem Elokechem. It's interesting in the pasuk of Aklola, if you don't listen to God's commandments, and you'll deviate from the path, to go after alien gods, idolatry. I mean, what do we go? You don't heed the word of Hashem, and you veer from the path, and we go to the most extreme level of violation. We find the same thing in the second paragraph of the Shema, which we just had in last week's parsha. What is Hisham lechem pen yiftel vavchem? In the second parsha portion of Kriya Shema, Nosati gishmechem bitom, v'aretz yitain l'shivula. The rains will come at times, the bounty will come, the produce will happen. However, Hisham lechem, but you have to be careful. Pen yiftel vavchem, your hearts will be seduced. V'avaratem elohim acherim. So we're going from the highest level, and the moment the sartem, Hisham pen yiftel vavchem, when you're seduced, we're speaking about idolatry, going literally to the extreme. So Rashi over there explains in last week's parsha on the second paragraph of the Shema that when a person detaches himself from Torah, it's a slippery slope, and you easily end up doing idolatry. It's the same thing. Hachlola. What's the imlo sishmu? If you turn your back on God and say, "Look, I'll do what I want," you know where you're going to end up. It's a slippery slope. Lo leches acher elim acherim. I'll pursue my own path. The person has nothing to hold them back. Lo sishmu. You don't listen. A person doesn't listen. He's vulnerable, even to the most extreme level of failure. A person says, I'll listen, but I'll choose what to listen, what not to listen. At least he's listening. Here, haklolim lo sishmu, you turn your back on God. I'll live my life as I choose. When you live your life as you choose, you can end up who knows where. That's v'sartem v'avaratem elim acherim. You'll end up doing idolatry. That's where you end up. The Sephardo says something interesting here. You know, in Judaism, is there such a thing as a neutral position? Especially if you're a man. A male, there's no moment that you're not of obligation. A male has an obligation to study Torah continuously. You're permitted to remove yourself for the sake of earning a living. You have to sleep, you have to eat, you have to relax. But even that, when you do that, that's only because Ein Kemach Ein Torah. It's only because to facilitate your life as a Jew, you must engage in the material to be able to exist and maintain yourself. What's the bracha? Asher tishmu. There's no gray area. There's no in between. It's either tishmu or lo tishmu. Person says, you know something, I'll coax. I won't do A, I won't do B. But there's no such thing. It's either A or B. There's no in between. You know, it's very interesting. The famous word from the Maral. The Maral says, Shlomo Melech tells us in Mishlei, Emes kenei val timkor. Acquire truth, don't sell it. Truth. Now, what is truth? The Torah itself is God's wisdom. The Gemara tells us in Shabbos that Chosomish LaKadosh Baruch Hu is emes, that the signet of God is truth. That's God's signet, emes. Let's say you have something which is 99.99999% truthful. Is that truth? It's not truth. The word emes is spelled Aleph Mem Tov. If you take the Aleph off emes, what's left? Mem Tov, mes. It's either all or nothing. In Torah, if you ask a person, what is the halacha? Is it permitted or is it not permitted? Is there a gray area? It's either permitted or not. Gray is because you don't understand. So emes is, it's either one way or not the other way. That's emes. Reino sad lefnechem is a brocha. What's brocha? Brocha is listening to Hashem. What's klola? Klola is when you don't listen. Automatically, you detach yourself from the truth. In Parshas Veschanan, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Klal Yisrael, "Atem adveikim Hashem Elokeichem chaim kol chamayom." Atem adveikim Hashem Elokeichem. When you cleave to God, chaim kol chamayom. You're living continuously. Why? So the Maral explains, Maral of Prague, what is the source of all life? God Himself. So if you attach yourself to the source of life, chaim kol chamayom, then you thrive and you're alive. But if you don't attach yourself, then you're not chaim, because you're detaching yourself from the what? From the source of life. As a brocha tishmu. What is blessing? By heeding the word of Hashem. Heeding the word of Hashem is you're attaching yourself to emes. You're living a life of truth. Truth is what God determines as truth. What's klala? Im lo sishmu. You don't listen. I'll do it my way. There's only one way, Hashem's way, which is emes. This is the understanding why lo sishmu is what? That's haklala. That's lo sishmu. Because brocha is dveikim. Life is blessing. Detach yourself from life, that's a curse. Just mention the learning today is the schus of Rav David Pinto, Rav David Chananya ben Mazel Madlin. That's his name. Okay, he has a good shliach. Alan's the doctor, good agent.
What happened, Rabbi?
I'll give you Alan.
The rough estimate.
We'd once mentioned in name of the Maral, the Gemara tells us in two locations that if you quantify something, either by measure or by weight, and then you pray to Hashem that bracha should come upon that, it's considered tefillah shov. a tefillah in vain. Once you quantify something, you pray that bracha should come upon it. It's a tefillah in vain. It's a supplication in vain. But if it's an unknown entity, quantity, and you pray, then the bracha has value. So the Maharal of Prague explains that the concept of bracha is a spiritual concept. Spiritual is not finite. Physical is finite. Everything within the physical realm is quantified. It has its parameters. In the spiritual world, it's not finite. So bracha is a spiritual concept, which I'll explain why in a moment, name it a Maharal. As a result of that, once you quantify something and you give it a physical characteristic, it no longer has relevance to bracha. So once you measure something, you count it, or you weigh it, you've already quantified it. Once you quantify it, you need a revealed miracle to change that. Hashem doesn't perform a revealed miracle, but something which is an unknown quantity, and it hasn't been quantified, then it has relevance to bracha, because it's an unknown entity. That's the Maharal of Prague. He says, what is it? Why is bracha something spiritual? If somebody has bracha, says, you should be blessed. To what extent? You should be blessed. Blessing is unending. That's bracha. Curse. A curse is within the physical realm. You denied. We speak about unlimited bounty. If you follow my statutes, you toil in my Torah, you toil in my mitzvahs, the bounty will be unlimited. Why? Because when you engage in the spiritual, which is the Torah and the mitzvahs, what is the result of that? As that is unlimited, it produces the unlimited. But if you deny yourself that means you're detaching yourself. You're not living as that spiritual person. You're living as that finite person. Then the person is subject to the curses. That's the tochacha. You're not willing to toil. What's toil? Toil means as much as I have to invest, I do. I apply myself to understand it. The mitzvah of study of Torah is day and night. You're supposed to do as much as you can. There's no such thing as study an hour a day. There's no such thing. If you only have an hour, you study an hour, but the mitzvah is not to study an hour a day. The mitzvah is to study as much as you can. So even the way it's depicted in the mitzvah of Torah, you do it as often as you can, as much as you can. So we're not putting a cap on it. As a result of that, that's because it's spiritual. It's not something which is quantified. When you breathe, breathing is part of life. You have to breathe continuously. You can't stop breathing. You have to continue learning. We say, Keim Chayinu V'Orach Yameinu. Torah is what is our life, and it's the length of our days. It's a continuous process. You need a continuous infusion of that spirituality to have relevance to the spiritual realm. As you have to have continuous blood flow in your system, and oxygen going into your lungs to be able to function. Otherwise, you can't continue. It's an ongoing, it's unceasing. One's the physical, one's the spiritual. So personally, very often it doesn't make sense. What do you have to study continuously? And what do you have to breathe continuously? And what do you have to, your blood flow has to be continuously. Oxygen is denied to the brain. What happens? Or if a person has a blockage, what happens? Everything has to flow. So just as this has to flow, that has to flow continuously. You can't have any interruptions. There's a beautiful word from the Britzker Rov. The Rambam writes, regarding any other mitzvah, we say osik mitzvah potem in a mitzvah. When you engage in one mitzvah, you don't need to have one mitzvah to do another mitzvah. The Gemara tells us, which we had about mitzvah, that if you're engaging in a lost article, the Torah says you're a custodian. What kind of custodian are you? Are you a shomer chinam? Seemingly, you're an unpaid custodian. Nobody's paying your wage. An unpaid shomer custodian, his level of liability is the least amount of liability. Only gross negligence. A shomer socher, if you're a paid custodian, you have a greater level of liability. So Rav Yosef says, a Shomer Aveda, a person who has a lost article, he has to take care of it, he's a Shomer Sofer. Why? Because what happens if a poor man comes to you to ask you for charity, and at that moment you're engaging in the lost article? You're not permitted to interrupt that moment, taking care of that, doing that mitzvah to give the poor man his whatever money you're going to give him. A penny saved is a penny earned. It's called Pruta de Rav Yosef. As a result of that, that's also mitzvah ben mitzvah. Because you're engaging in the mitzvah of Havshavas Aveda, taking care of it, to be able to return it to its rightful owner. Therefore, you're absolved of giving tzedakah. However, when it comes to Torah, you're permitted to interrupt your Torah study if the mitzvah that comes upon you cannot be delegated through a third party. You're the only one who's able to do the mitzvah. So let's say you're studying and a poor man comes to you. You're obligated to interrupt your Torah study to attend to that person's material needs, the poor man. Torah is the only time you interrupt. The Rambam writes that when you interrupt your Torah study, because no one else is able to attend to that mitzvah, when you interrupt, you should have in mind that you're detaching yourself to return to the study. Ram doesn't say you're permitted to interrupt, to do the mitzvah. When you interrupt to return. That's the Rambam. So he says, you see from the Rambam, it's not you just interrupt and you engage. Even in your mindset is that the first moment you have to return, you're going to reattach yourself. There should never be that detachment of the Torah itself. You go to sleep. What do you sleep? You have to sleep because the next day you have responsibilities. Without sleep, you can't continue. So you're sleeping to continue. When you take the break from Torah, it's to continue. Whether it's the mitzvah, whether it's the sleeping, whether it's working, whatever it may be, whether it's eating, whether it's relaxing. I have to relax to return. I have to work to have the means to get back to Torah study. There's always a continuum. But that's again, because that's brocha. Brocha is continuous. It's not finite. Torah is not finite. It's an ongoing process. Chlala is only a result of detaching yourself from the spiritual. So once you detach yourself from the spiritual, you're living a finite life. Therefore, the consequence, the result of that is finite, which is chlala. One does not appear at tefillin, and they bring you the tefillin between Goal Yisrael and Shemona Esrei. You're supposed to put them on, but you put them on without a bracha. Why? Because saying the bracha would be a hefsek. You're not supposed to interrupt between Goal Yisrael and Shemona Esrei. You need smichas kul tefillah. There should be no interruption, even to say the bracha on the tefillin. But it's important when you say the Shemona Esrei, you're supposed to wear tefillin. When do you say the bracha? When you finish the Shemona Esrei, you say the bracha on the tefillin. But we know whenever you say a brichas hamitzos, it always has to, the mitzvah has to be predicated with a bracha. So how's it predicated with a bracha? But nevertheless, you say the bracha when it's not you take off the tefillin, put them back on. You say the tefillin, you say the bracha while you're wearing the tefillin. I'm supposed to touch it, just to be in touch with it. But the mitzvah already, you're engaging in the mitzvah. The answer is because every moment you wear tefillin, you're fulfilling another mitzvah saseh, positive command of wearing tefillin. So every moment is the moment before the next fulfillment of the mitzvah. So whenever you say the bracha is always preceding the fulfillment of the mitzvah. Therefore, it's always a continuous over lasiyosa. It's always prior to the fulfillment of the mitzvah. You eat matzah and you eat the kazayas. Once you eat the kazayas, you can't say the bracha any longer. Because you fulfilled the mitzvah of what? Of eating matzah. You ate the minimum amount. But tefillin or tzitzis, where every moment you wear tzitzis, you're fulfilling a positive commandment of wearing tzitzis on a four-cornered garment, or wearing tefillin on your arm, on your head, every moment it's an additional mitzvah saseh, positive commandment. Let's talk. We don't wear tefillin all day. Even we have free time. Why? Because to wear tefillin, you're not supposed to be distracted. And in addition, you have to maintain a certain level of body hygiene. Otherwise, you're not permitted to wear tefillin. So during davening, we're focused on, hopefully, on the davening. So we wear tefillin. Once the davening, we finish davening, we take the tefillin off for that reason. Because the level of focus is not the same, we take it off. It would be a disrespect to wear it beyond that point. Now, when you wear tefillin and our davening's over, it's almost, when do you take off your tefillin? If you ever look around the shul, many people, before davening's over, and we're talking about a Sunday morning, we're not talking about the rushing to, rushing off to work. When did they take off the tefillin? Usually before davening's over. Why? Because we only wear the tefillin up to this point, not beyond that point. That's the reason. But you can wear the tefillin beyond that point. Every moment you wear the tefillin, it's a mitzvah saseh. What are you denying yourself? The mitzvah of wearing tefillin. Well, I wore tefillin, but you realize every moment you wear it continuously, it's another positive commandment. So if you're able, and the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos, we have no inkling of what the extent of what a mitzvah is, what its value is. So if you're able to wear it another 3 minutes, another 5 minutes, what are you denying yourself by taking it off? You have no idea what you're denying yourself. But it's even more than that. This is when I take them off. If the davening is over, we don't want to film beyond davening because we're concerned, because we're not able to have that, maintain that cognizance. But if you take it off, that means I only wear tefillin up to this point, not beyond that point. So in what context are you wearing tefillin? In a limited, in a finite context. So you're doing it a mitzvah in a finite context. That's what you're doing. But the Torah says every moment you wear the tefillin, every moment you wear the tzitzis, you're fulfilling a positive commandment. What do you mean up to here and not beyond that point? So you're giving it a characteristic of something which is what? Which is finite. Don't you realize you're actually minimizing the value of something which is spiritual by doing that? The Ramah writes in Shulchan Aruch, he's supposed to, when we wear tefillin, you're supposed to minimally hear 4 kadeshim. You're supposed to hear 4 kadeshim, kaddish 4 times. So if you don't hear, if one doesn't hear kaddish right after, before Mizbah Shir, after Korbanos, or between Mizbah Shir and Baruch Shemar, so you have the first kaddish you hear is after Yishtabach. The second kaddish you hear is when? After Tachnun. The third kaddish, what do you hear? That's after Avodat Zion. The fourth kaddish is after Aleinu. So really, you shouldn't. If you didn't hear 4 kaddeshim, you're not supposed to take off your tefillin, unless if you have no choice, you have to go to work. Okay, but if you're able to wear the tefillin for 4 kaddeshim, it gives it a special value. How many people even know the halacha? You're supposed to wear tefillin for 4 kaddeshim. Kaddish is the ultimate kiddush Hashem. That's why a child who's Ovel says Kaddish for 11 months, because he's sanctifying Hashem's name, and that accrues to the parent. That's why you say Kaddish. So you're wearing tefillin to be able to respond to Kaddish. You take off the tefillin. Wearing tefillin is a different level. I'm just sensitizing you to see the value of certain things. Well, I take it off. What do you mean take it off? Well, Sunday there's a breakfast. I have to go down to the breakfast. Okay? If that has some level of value, enough to put a limitation on how you wear tefillin, then it's a little bit of a problem. Then you're not seeing it correctly or appreciating it correctly. If you read about the Holocaust in the concentration camp, there were people, one person had a pair of tefillin, and the other inmates of that concentration camp, if they could put on the tefillin for literally 30 seconds, and it was even questioned whether the tefillin was still kosher, because it was subject to the whole what was going on there. If they could put on the tefillin for literally put it on, take it off. That's it. It was like they breathed fresh air. And if they could keep it on a second longer, they'd want it a second longer. They have that level of attachment. Today, you can wear tefillin as long as you want. You can study Torah as much as you want. Not like in Russia one time. You couldn't study. The refuseniks, they would go into hiding and they take risks of imprisonment if they would study Torah. We have all the Torah we want, and we turn our backs. I've had enough today. Today's my vacation day. Today it's this, today it's that. When you don't have it, then you start maybe appreciating it. When you do have it, then you don't appreciate what it is. That's reality, what it is. Because, the Yetzer Hara plays mind games with us. You can do it later. It's called procrastination. You've studied enough. But if you don't have it, the Yetzer Hara can't play that game with the people. We haven't studied, we know nothing. We're totally detached. We're devoid of it. So therefore, they went for it, even at the risk of their lives. We have it as much as we want, as often as we have, and whenever we want it. The Yetzer Hara could always whisper in ears. You can do it later. There's something important to do now, do it later. Al Tomik She'efne Eshne, says in Pirkei Avos, don't say when I have free time, I'll study. Because that moment may not happen. People procrastinate. At the end of the day, the day's over. And at the end of the day, you don't study. And if I'll study half an hour, at the end, I'm studying 5 minutes. Or maybe not at all. In Tefillah Zaka, we say, God gives us various functions. We see, we touch, we speak, power of speech. And we say over there that when we kiss the Sefer Torah with our lips, we sanctify our lips. When you engage in that, that creates a sanctification. So if you give, let's say you take your hand and you take $1 or whatever, put it in the tzedakah box. Doing the mitzvah, it creates a sanctity on your hand. That creates a kedusha. Because your body is engaged in the mitzvah. Very often you have people, they'll put $1 on the table and the person comes around collecting in the shul and they say, take the $1. No, you should take the $1 and put it in the man's hand. Because by engaging in the mitzvah, you're a beneficiary of doing the mitzvah. You're sanctifying yourself. Or very often the person would say, we'll put his hand in his pocket and give it with his left hand. Not with his right hand. For many reasons, you should do it with your right. Every time you do a mitzvah, the Gemara says you should do it with your right hand, not with your left hand. Because the right has greater value. Besides that, the right always represents you do something with alacrity. If you're a right-handed person, you don't do it with your left hand. The Torah makes it a point. A righty puts his tefillin on his left hand. It's called yad keho. You put it on the weaker hand, right? Yeah, yad keho, the weaker hand, the weaker of the two. The right is the stronger. When you do a mitzvah, you do it with what represents the stronger. That's alacrity. That's zeal. That's right. That's the right hand. All these little tidbits, we speak about cumulative. Person that eats unhealthy, cumulative over years, a person compromises his health. Lahavdil. You do little tidbits of kedusha, right rather than left. Engaging rather than just leaving it. It adds up. It adds up tremendously. It's cumulative. It creates an intense level of kedusha. We speak of mitzvah goreres mitzvah. Every little mitzvah brings to another mitzvah. And qualitatively, if you do the mitzvah with greater quality, it brings to a greater quality of mitzvah. That's the reality of the way it works. That's the system.
So, Rabbi, I'm just sorry. So you put your tefillin on your left hand to bolster the left hand because it's weak?
No, by tefillin, the Torah says you put the tefillin on your left, on the weaker hand. So therefore, if you're writing, that's why we put a tefillin on our left hand.
Because you're using the right hand to perform. You're using the right hand to perform the. You're using the right hand to perform the mitzvah of putting it on the left. Is that what I'm to understand?
The mitzvah is to tie it on, but every moment, when you wear tefillin, you fulfill the mitzvah every moment. On which hand are you? Is on the tefillin worn on the left, right? You put it on with your right hand. But the mitzvah is to wear it on the left hand. Every moment you wear the tefillin on your left hand, every moment you fulfill a positive commandment of wearing tefillin.
No, I think the question is, if it's the weaker hand, why do you put it on the weaker hand?
No, that's separate. No, that's not his question. I'm just showing you.
No, it is. It is. I'm trying to understand why you wouldn't put it, if you're supposed to do
Oh,
your mitzvah with the
that's the
right
question.
hand.
No,
Yes,
because,
yeah, I'm
because
lost.
the reason is because it corresponds to the heart.
Okay, okay. So that's the preamble that, whatever that's in
Correct.
the
So you
door.
can ask me a question about what a person's a lefty. He puts that on his right hand. Right?
Right.
It doesn't correspond to his heart. He'd say the majority of people are right-handed, not left-handed. It represents the heart. The tefillin shel yad represents the heart. Therefore, it's the weak, by most people, the weaker hand corresponds to the heart. The tefillin shel rosh corresponds to the brain. You know, the Shulchan Aruch says that when you put on tefillin shel yad, besides having a mind, you're fulfilling the mitzvah of putting on tefillin, you have to have a mind that you're dedicating your heart, which is emotion, to God. That's the Shulchan Aruch. And you have to have a mind, Zechel Tzis Mitzrayim. Those, in addition to putting on the tefillin, doing the mitzvah, you're dedicating your heart to Hashem. In addition, which means you're subordinating your heart to God, Zechel Tzis Mitzrayim. When you put the tefillin shel rosh on, you have in mind, you're dedicating your intellect to God. Because the tefillin shel rosh sit on is the location where the brain is. You're dedicating your intellect to Hashem. In addition to have in mind, I'm fulfilling the mitzvah of putting tefillin shel rosh on my head.
You would think you would put Shal Rosh on